I never thought my quest for a simple fence would turn into a full-blown municipal war, but that's what happens when common sense collides with a petty tyrant armed with a clipboard and a misplaced sense of authority. It all started because we got a dog. A big, goofy golden retriever named Gus who had more energy than a toddler on a sugar high. My wife, Sarah, and I had promised our 2 kids, Lily and Tom, a dog for years, and we'd finally found the perfect one at a local rescue. The only problem was our backyard. It was a nice, open space that blended seamlessly into our neighbors' yards, which was great for block parties but terrible for containing a 70-pound fur missile. A fence wasn't just a good idea, it was a necessity. Our neighborhood, Oakwood Creek, was the kind of place people moved to for peace and quiet. The houses were well kept but not ostentatious, the lawns were green, and the kids all played together in the street until the fireflies came out. For the first 5 years we lived there, the Community Standards Committee was a joke. It was run by a group of old-timers who met once a quarter, drank lukewarm coffee, and rubber-stamped any reasonable request that came their way. Their guiding principle was simple: don't be a nuisance, and don't paint your house neon pink. It was a system that worked because it was built on mutual respect, not rigid enforcement. Then, Brenda Collins moved in. Brenda bought the corner lot 2 houses down from me. She was a woman in her late 50s who carried herself with the unshakable certainty of someone who has never been told she was wrong. Within 6 months, she had somehow maneuvered her way onto the Community Standards Committee. Within a year, she was its president. The old-timers, who just wanted a quiet retirement, were no match for her boundless energy and encyclopedic knowledge of the bylaws, most of which they had forgotten even existed. She didn't just join the committee, she staged a quiet, bloodless coup. The changes started small. A monthly newsletter began appearing in our mailboxes, printed on offensively bright yellow paper. It was filled with friendly reminders that felt anything but friendly. Mailboxes had to be a specific model and color, a particular shade of beige that looked like it had given up on life. Holiday decorations could only be displayed between December 1st and January 5th, not a day sooner or later. Garbage cans were not to be visible from the street except on collection day itself. One of my neighbors, a sweet guy named Frank, got a formal warning letter because he'd put his cans out the night before, a practice everyone had followed for 20 years. That was Brenda's opening salvo. We all grumbled, we all rolled our eyes, but for the most part, we complied. It was easier than picking a fight. We just wanted to live our lives. We had no idea that we were feeding a beast that would soon grow out of control. My own journey into the bureaucratic heart of darkness began on a sunny Tuesday morning in April. I run a small general contracting business, so I know my way around permits and regulations. I spent a weekend measuring my property lines, drawing up a detailed plan for a 6-foot cedar privacy fence, and filling out the official application from the Oakwood Creek Community Standards Committee. It was a straightforward, professional document. I included material specs, a site plan, and even a photo of a similar fence to show how it would look. I felt confident. It was a standard fence, the kind you see in 1,000 suburban backyards. I dropped the application, along with the required $50 processing fee, into the committee's Dropbox at the community clubhouse. 2 weeks went by. Nothing. The bylaws stated a response time of 14 business days. On the 15th day, I called the number listed on the website. It went straight to a voicemail. Brenda's voicemail. I left a polite message. Another week passed. Still nothing. By now, Gus was getting bigger, and my temporary orange plastic fencing was becoming a neighborhood eyesore. More importantly, it wasn't working. Gus treated it as a minor inconvenience on his way to visit Mrs. Gable's prize-winning petunias next door. Finally, I decided to take a more direct approach. I knew Brenda worked from home, so one afternoon, I walked down the street and rang her doorbell. She opened the door with a look of profound annoyance, as if I were a door-to-door salesman peddling vacuum cleaners. She was wearing a track suit that looked more expensive than my work truck and held a small, yapping dog that seemed to be composed entirely of fluff and rage. "Yes," she said, her voice clipped and impatient. "Hi, Brenda. I'm Mark Peterson from down the street. I was just following up on a fence application I submitted about 3 weeks ago. She stared at me, her eyes narrowing. A fence, she repeated, as if the word itself were offensive. Peterson. I don't recall that name. I dropped it in the box at the clubhouse, I explained, trying to keep my tone friendly. It's for a 6-foot cedar fence in my backyard. She mused, looking past me as if inspecting the molecular structure of the air. We have a lot of applications. It's probably in the queue. You'll hear from us when you hear from us. She started to close the door. Well, the bylaws say 14 business days, I said, wedging my foot metaphorically in the door. It's been a bit longer than that, and I'm just trying to get my project scheduled. Her eye snapped back to mine, cold and hard. The bylaws are a guideline, Mr. Peterson. We are a committee of volunteers, and we review things on our own schedule. Rushing us will not help your case. She gave me a tight, unpleasant smile. I'll look for it. Have a nice day. The door clicked shut in my face. I stood there on her perfectly manicured porch, fuming. It wasn't just the delay, it was the condescension, the casual dismissal. This wasn't a volunteer committee serving the community, it was a tiny kingdom, and I had just inconvenienced the Queen. Another week went by. I received an email. Not a phone call, not a letter, but a terse, one-line email from an anonymous committee address. It read, "Your application is incomplete. Please resubmit." No explanation. No details on what was missing. Just incomplete. I was furious, but I took a deep breath. I printed out a fresh application, filled it out again, making sure every single box was checked and every line was filled. I attached another copy of the site plan, the material specs, and the photo. I even wrote a polite cover letter explaining that this was my second submission and asking them to please contact me if any further information was needed. I walked it down to the clubhouse and personally handed it to the part-time administrator who worked the front desk, asking her to make sure Brenda got it. I even got a receipt. This time, the response was faster. A week later, another email. Application received. Under review, progress, I thought. I was wrong. The under review status stretched for a month. Every time I inquired, I got the same boilerplate response. Gus was now a full-fledged escape artist. The final straw came when I got a call from Mrs. Gable, my elderly neighbor on the other side. She was a widow in her 80s, a kind soul who had lived in her house for 50 years. "Mark, dear," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I don't mean to be a bother, but your Gus is in my garden again. He's dug up my roses." I rushed over, apologized profusely, and spent the next hour helping her replant her mangled rose bushes. She was gracious about it, but I could see the stress in her eyes. It was my fault. My dog, my responsibility. My inability to get a simple fence built was now affecting my neighbors. That evening, I sent a firm but professional email to the committee stating that the continued delay was creating a safety and liability issue, and I required a decision within 5 business days. The next morning, I got a call. It was Brenda. Her voice was dripping with false sweetness. "Mr. Peterson, I received your demanding email. I'm afraid I have some bad news. We seem to have misplaced your second application. These things happen. You'll have to submit it again." That was it. That was the moment my frustration turned into cold, hard resolve. "Misplaced," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "Brenda," I handed it directly to the administrator. "I have a receipt." There was a pause. "Well," she said, her tone shifting from sweet to sour. "The administrator must have misplaced it. It's not my fault. If you want a fence, you'll follow the process. Submit it again," and she hung up. It was a declaration of war. She wasn't just being incompetent, she was being malicious. She was enjoying this. I spent the rest of the day stewing, my mind racing. I could just build the fence and dare her to fine me, but I knew that would lead to liens and legal battles I didn't have time for. I had to fight her, but I had to do it on her turf. I had to use the rules against her. That evening, I sat down at my computer and started digging. I found the town's municipal website and downloaded every document I could find related to homeowner associations and community committees. I read through the state statutes. Then I went to the Oakwood Creek Community website and downloaded the full, unabridged bylaws, the architectural guidelines, and the minutes from every committee meeting for the past 3 years. I spent hours reading, highlighting, and taking notes. It was as boring as watching paint dry, but I was on a mission. A few things became clear. Brenda had consolidated her power by rewriting sections of the operating procedures, giving herself, as president, unilateral authority to deem applications incomplete or requiring further review without a full committee vote. She was the gatekeeper. Nothing got past her unless she wanted it to. The meeting minutes were also revealing. They were vague and filled with procedural jargon, but a pattern emerged. Projects from certain residents were approved in days, while others languished for months. There was a section about an approved contractor list for any work done on community property, like the landscaping at the neighborhood entrance. One company, Prestige Property Management, seemed to get all the contracts, often without competitive bids. I filed that little tidbit away for later. The next day, I didn't resubmit my application. Instead, I drove down to the county clerk's office. I filed a Freedom of Information Act request for all correspondence between the Oakwood Creek Community Standards Committee and the Town Planning Board for the last 2 years. I also requested copies of the committee's annual financial statements, which they were required to file as a registered non-profit entity. I knew this was a long shot, but I was casting a wide net. Then, I submitted my third application. This time, I did it differently. I filled out the form, attached all the documents, and made 3 complete copies. I sent one via certified mail to the committee's official address, requiring a signature upon delivery. I hand-delivered the second copy to the clubhouse administrator again, but this time I had her sign and date a form I'd drafted, acknowledging receipt of the complete application packet. The third copy I kept for my records. I was building a paper trail that not even Brenda could pretend to lose. The certified mail receipt came back signed. A week passed. Then 2. On the 14th business day, I sent an email inquiring about the status. The response was a new one, a masterpiece of bureaucratic obstruction. Your application has been flagged for special architectural review to ensure it complies with the neighborhood's historical aesthetic. Historical aesthetic? Our neighborhood was built in the 1980s. The only thing historical about it was the bad wallpaper some people still had in their bathrooms. It was a complete fabrication, a delaying tactic designed to wear me down. This was when I realized I needed allies. I started talking to my neighbors. I began with Frank, the guy who'd gotten the warning about his garbage cans. He was still salty about it. Then I talked to the family across the street who had been forced to repaint their front door because it was the wrong shade of hunter green. I spoke with a young couple who had been trying for 6 months to get approval for a small backyard playset for their kids. The stories were all the same: endless delays, arbitrary rulings, and the dismissive, condescending attitude of Brenda Collins. Everyone was miserable, but everyone was too afraid or too busy to fight back alone. That's when I met Arthur. Arthur lived on the next street over. He was in his late 70s, retired, and had lived in Oakwood Creek since the first houses were built. He was one of the original members of the committee, before Brenda had driven them all away. I found him tending his garden one Saturday afternoon and introduced myself. I told him my story. He listened patiently, nodding as he snipped dead blossoms from a rose bush. When I finished, he sighed and leaned on his trowel. "Son," he said, his voice gravelly but kind, "you're not the first person Brenda has done this to. You're just the first one with enough sand to fight back." He told me about the old days, how the committee was meant to be a helpful guide, not a police force. He explained how Brenda had exploited the apathy of the residents to seize control. "She craves power," Arthur said, looking me straight in the eye. "It's not about the rules. It's about being the one who makes the rules. It's about making people bend to her will. He also told me something interesting about the prestige property management company that kept getting all the community contracts. Funny thing about them, he said with a wry smile. They started getting all the work right after Brenda's brother-in-law, a fellow by the name of Gary, moved to town and started a landscaping business. Never could prove anything, but the timing was mighty convenient. That was the missing piece I needed. My frustration now had a new target. This wasn't just a power trip, it was potentially corrupt. My fight wasn't just about my fence anymore. It was about taking our neighborhood back from a petty dictator who was possibly lining her own family's pockets. A few days later, a package arrived in the mail. It was the response to my FOIA request from the county. I tore it open and started sifting through the documents. Most of it was boring procedural paperwork, but then I found it, the committee's annual financial reports. I spread them out on my dining room table and started going through them line by line. The numbers were shocking. The fees for community landscaping and maintenance had nearly tripled in the 2 years since Brenda had taken over. Payments to Prestige Property Management were astronomical. They were charging the community $500 a month just to mow the small patch of grass at the entrance. They billed $2,000 to plant a dozen flower pots that died within a month. I'm a contractor. I know what things cost. These prices weren't just high, they were predatory. I went to the state's Corporate Commission website and did a search for Prestige Property Management. The registered agent and sole officer was listed as Gary Jensen. I did a quick social media search. Brenda's maiden name was Jensen. Gary was indeed her brother-in-law. Arthur was right. It was a classic case of self-dealing, using community funds to enrich her own family. She wasn't just a tyrant, she was a crook. But I still needed to connect the dots in a way that was undeniable. The financial reports were suspicious, but they weren't a smoking gun. I needed proof that she was intentionally blocking projects like mine while fast-tracking others for her friends or for reasons that benefited her. The meeting minutes were too vague. I needed something more. While I was digging, Brenda made her next move. A certified letter arrived. It was a formal notice of violation. Not for my fence, which didn't exist, but for the temporary orange plastic fencing I still had up. It was, according to the letter, aesthetically displeasing and not in compliance with community standards. I was being fined $100 a day until it was removed. The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. She was fining me for the temporary solution I was forced to use because she wouldn't approve the permanent one. This was a classic bully tactic, designed to inflict financial pain and force me to give up. The fines were piling up, and if I didn't pay, they could put a lien on my house. The situation had escalated from annoying to serious. It was time to call in a professional. I found a lawyer, a man named David Chen, who specialized in real estate and HOA disputes. I laid out the whole story for him, showing him my paper trail, the financial reports, and the violation notice. David listened intently, a small smile playing on his lips. When I was done, he leaned back in his chair. "Mark, this is one of the most blatant cases of targeted harassment and potential self-dealing I've seen in a long time," he said. "The fines for the temporary fence are legally dubious, given the circumstances. We can fight that. But the bigger issue is her abuse of power. We have a strong circumstantial case for financial misconduct, but we need to nail it down." He advised me on the next step. "The bylaws," he said, "almost certainly have a provision allowing any member of the community to inspect the detailed financial records, the actual invoices and receipts, with reasonable notice. Not just the annual summary they file with the county. We need to see the invoices from Prestige." He was right. Buried deep in the bylaws was a clause allowing for the inspection of financial records. David drafted a formal letter for me, citing the specific bylaw and requesting to schedule a time to review all invoices from the past 2 years. I sent it via certified mail. Brenda's response was predictable. She replied via email that the records were currently undergoing an internal audit and were not available for inspection. It was another lie, another stonewall. But it was a critical mistake on her part. By refusing a legitimate request that was guaranteed by the bylaws, she had overplayed her hand. "This is perfect," David said when I showed him her email. "Her refusal is a direct violation of the bylaws. This gives us leverage." Meanwhile, the fines for the orange fence were accumulating. The total was now over $2,000. I received another certified letter, this one informing me that a lien was being placed on my property. My personal dispute was now a mark on my home's title. This was no longer a game. I was at my wit's end. I had the evidence of her financial shenanigans, but she was still holding all the cards. She was hitting me where it hurt, threatening my family's biggest financial asset. I felt trapped. That night, I was staring at the pile of paperwork on my desk, feeling defeated, when I noticed something I'd overlooked. It was in the architectural guidelines, a section on pre-approved designs. It listed a number of standard project types, decks, sheds, fences, that could be fast-tracked for approval if they met specific, predefined criteria. There were 3 pre-approved fence designs. One of them, Style C, Classic Cedar Privacy, was an exact match for the plans I had submitted 3 times. According to the very rules Brenda claimed to worship, my application shouldn't have needed a special review. It should have been approved almost automatically. She hadn't just been delaying my application, she had been ignoring her own committee's written procedures. This was the key. Her refusal wasn't just arbitrary, it was a clear violation of a specific, written rule. Her historical aesthetic claim was not just a lie, but a provably false justification for ignoring the established process for a pre-approved design. Armed with this new information, David and I devised a new plan. It was time to stop playing defense and go on the attack. We weren't just going to fight the lien or get my fence approved. We were going to remove her from power. The annual community meeting was in 2 weeks. It was usually a sleepy affair, attended by a handful of residents. This year, it was going to be different. I spent the next week talking to every neighbor I could. I showed them the financial reports. I told them about the prestige property management connection. I explained how my pre-approved fence design had been illegally blocked. I showed them the lien on my house. The grumbling turned into outrage. People who had been afraid to speak up were now furious. We had a cause, and we had a leader. Reluctantly, that leader was me. The 4th and final fence application was the centerpiece of our plan. It was identical to the first 3, but with one crucial addition. David helped me draft a new cover letter. It was a masterwork of polite, professional, but legally devastating prose. The letter began by stating, "This is the 4th submission of an application for a fence of a pre-approved design, specifically Style C as detailed in the Community Architectural Guidelines, page 12, section 4." It went on to document the dates of the 3 previous submissions and the committee's failure to act on them in accordance with the bylaws. It noted that the justification of historical aesthetic review was invalid for a pre-approved design. It politely demanded the immediate approval of the permit and the removal of the illegal lien placed on my property. Then came the final paragraph, the checkmate move. It stated that if the permit was not approved within 48 hours, and if I did not receive written confirmation of the lien's removal, a lawsuit would be filed against the committee and its officers personally for breach of fiduciary duty, targeted harassment, and financial misconduct. And the final touch, the one that made it all work, at the bottom of the letter, under the CC'd line, we added 2 names. The first was David Chen, my attorney. The second was the Honorable Robert Miller, the mayor of our town. I didn't actually know the mayor, but his email address was public record. The inclusion of his name was a strategic masterstroke. It elevated the dispute from a neighborhood squabble to a matter of official municipal interest. It signaled that we were prepared to go over Brenda's head and expose her little fiefdom to the scrutiny of the entire town. It was a bluff, but a powerful one. I sent the entire packet, the application, the cover letter, and copies of all my evidence, as a single PDF in an email. I sent it to the committee's official address. And I CC'd my lawyer and the mayor. I hit send and leaned back in my chair, my heart pounding. All I could do now was wait. I didn't have to wait long. Less than 3 hours later, my phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number with the town's area code. I answered it. "Is this Mark Peterson?" a man's voice asked. "Yes, it is." "Mr. Peterson, this is Robert Miller. I'm the mayor. I was just included on a rather detailed email you sent to your community committee. I've got to say, in my 12 years in office, I've never seen anything quite like it. My office is already getting calls from some of your neighbors. What on earth is going on over there in Oakwood Creek?" I spent the next 20 minutes explaining everything to him. He listened patiently, occasionally letting out a sigh or a low whistle. When I finished, he was silent for a moment. "This is unacceptable," he said finally, his voice firm. "HOAs and committees have a right to self-govern, but they don't have the right to harass residents or violate their own bylaws, let alone engage in what looks like some very shady financial dealings. And placing a lien on your house over this? It's an abuse of power." He continued, "I'm going to have my staff look into this immediately. The town has some oversight authority when it comes to registered community associations, especially concerning financial transparency. In the meantime, I'm going to make a phone call. I think your problem might get solved very quickly." He wasn't kidding. 24 hours after I sent that email, 2 things happened. First, I received a call from a shaken-sounding woman on the committee, not Brenda, who informed me that an emergency meeting had been held. My fence permit had been unanimously approved. Second, an email arrived from Brenda herself. It was short and dripping with barely concealed rage. It contained a scanned copy of the official form filed with the county, releasing the lien on my property. There was no apology, no explanation. Just the document. I had one. I had my permit. The lien was gone. But it wasn't over. The annual meeting was still a week away, and the hornet's nest had been kicked. The mayor's office had started a formal inquiry, and my neighbors were now fully mobilized. Brenda had given me what I wanted, but she had done it to save herself, not to make things right. Her reign of terror had to end for good. The night of the annual meeting, the community clubhouse was packed. In previous years, you could count the attendees on 2 hands. Tonight, there were over 100 people crammed into the small room. People were standing along the walls and spilling out into the hallway. The air was thick with anticipation. Brenda and the 2 other committee members sat at a folding table at the front of the room. She looked pale and tense. She tried to run the meeting as usual, droning on about landscaping budgets and holiday decoration rules, but no one was listening. When she opened the floor for new business, my hand shot up. Every eye in the room turned to me. "The chair recognizes Mr. Peterson," she said, her voice tight. I walked to the front of the room with a folder in my hand. I hadn't planned to speak, but now I felt I had to. I had to do it for Mrs. Gable, for Frank, for all the other people she had bullied. "My name is Mark Peterson," I began, my voice steady. "And for the past 4 months, I've been trying to get a permit for a simple fence. A fence that, as it turns out, is a pre-approved design in our own guidelines. My application was lost twice, ignored, and illegally delayed. I was subjected to thousands of dollars in retaliatory fines and had an illegal lien placed on my home. All because I had the audacity to ask our committee president to follow her own rules." A murmur went through the crowd. I continued, my voice rising with indignation. "But this isn't just about my fence. It's about a pattern of abuse and mismanagement. It's about a committee that has stopped serving the community and started ruling it." I opened the folder. "I have here financial records that show our community fees have been used to pay exorbitant amounts to a single company, Prestige Property Management, without competitive bids. A company that happens to be owned by our president's brother-in-law." Gasps echoed through the room. Brenda shot to her feet. "That is an outrageous and slanderous accusation," she shrieked, her face turning a blotchy red. "Our finances are perfectly in order. They were audited." "Were they?" I shot back. Because when I, as a resident, exercised my right under the bylaws to inspect the detailed invoices, I was told the records were unavailable. That, Madam President, is a direct violation of the rules you claim to uphold. Arthur stood up from his seat in the front row. She's right, he called out, his voice ringing with authority. I was on this committee for 15 years. We never, ever denied a resident access to the books. And we always got at least 3 bids for any major project. What's happening now is wrong. Suddenly, others started speaking up. Frank told the story of his garbage cans. The young couple talked about their rejected playset. One by one, a dozen people stood and shared their own stories of harassment and intimidation. The room was electric with shared frustration. Brenda's authority crumbled before our eyes. Her 2 fellow committee members looked horrified, sinking lower in their chairs as if wishing the floor would swallow them. The final blow came from an unexpected source. A woman in the back of the room stood up. "My name is Sheila Davis," she said. "I'm a forensic accountant with the district attorney's office. I'm also a resident of this community. And based on what I've heard tonight, and the documents Mr. Peterson was kind enough to share with me earlier, I believe there is more than enough evidence to warrant a formal criminal investigation into fraud and embezzlement." The room fell silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Brenda stared at her, her mouth hanging open. The color drained from her face. She looked around the room, at the sea of angry, determined faces. There was no support for her. No one to defend her. She grabbed her purse, pushed her chair back so hard it fell over, and fled the room without another word. In the chaotic aftermath, a motion was made from the floor to dissolve the current Community Standards Committee and elect an interim one. Arthur was nominated by acclamation to lead it. The vote was unanimous. The coup was over. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. The district attorney's office did, in fact, launch an investigation. They subpoenaed the committee's financial records, and the internal audit Brenda had claimed was happening turned out to be a frantic attempt to cook the books. It didn't work. The evidence was overwhelming. Brenda and her brother-in-law were arrested and charged with multiple counts of fraud and embezzlement. They had bilked the community out of nearly $80,000 over 2 years. The interim committee, led by Arthur, went to work immediately. They rewrote the most oppressive rules, simplified the application process, and established a new standard of complete transparency. My Fence, the catalyst for the whole revolution, was the first project approved under the new regime. I built it myself over a weekend with the help of a few grateful neighbors. It was a beautiful fence, sturdy and straight. Gus loved it. Mrs. Gable loved it even more. Brenda's house went up for sale a few months later. Her legal fees had bankrupted her. She and her husband pleaded guilty to lesser charges to avoid a long prison sentence. They were sentenced to 5 years of probation and ordered to pay full restitution to the community. They moved away in disgrace, disappearing from Oakwood Creek as quickly as they had arrived. It took about a year for the neighborhood to fully recover. The stolen money was eventually repaid, and the new committee used it to make actual improvements. We got new playground equipment at the park and beautiful, professionally designed landscaping at the entrance, installed by a local company that won the bid fair and square. The oppressive yellow newsletters were replaced by a friendly monthly email. A sense of community, of neighborliness, returned. People weren't afraid anymore. They were engaged. The annual meetings were now well attended, not out of anger, but out of a shared sense of ownership. About 2 years after it all happened, I ran into Brenda. It was at a grocery store in the next town over. I almost didn't recognize her. She looked smaller, older. The fire was gone from her eyes. She saw me, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of the old arrogance, but it was quickly replaced by something else, shame. She avoided my gaze and hurried down another aisle. I didn't feel anger or even satisfaction. I just felt a quiet sense of pity. She had built a tiny, miserable kingdom, and in the end, she was its only victim. Sometimes, when I'm in my backyard watching Gus chase a ball and my kids play on the swings, I look at my fence. It's more than just wood and nails to me. It's a symbol. It's a reminder that communities are built on respect, not regulations. It's proof that one person, armed with the truth and a little bit of resolve, can stand up to a bully and win. It's a testament to the fact that most people just want to live in peace, but when you push them too far, they will stand together. And it all started because I needed to keep my goofy dog from digging up my neighbor's roses. I never wanted to be a hero. I just wanted a fence. But in fighting for that simple thing, our whole neighborhood found its voice again, and that's a legacy I'm damn proud of. The peace and quiet we have now isn't the silence of apathy, it's the calm that comes from knowing you're surrounded by good neighbors who have your back. And that's a feeling no fence can contain.